All right. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who is Stephen Espada Dawson, who is a Halls Fellow in Poetry at the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and also the recipient of a Pushcart Prize award, as well as the Ruth Lilly Poetry Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation. And most recently, his work has appeared in AGNI, Guernica, as well as the Kenyon Review and Ninth Letter. So please help me welcome Stephen. We're so excited to have you talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Monica, for the introduction. Thank you for coming here. You too. I hope we're joined by a couple more folks. But if not, this is great. This is very intimate. You know, poetry is very intimate, so this makes sense for us. Also, even though I had the reminder of the recording, the loud voice, it's still jarring every time. You know, it is kind of frightening, that voice. I feel like they should, I don't know, work. They should work about that. But yes, I am Stephen. I'm a poetry fellow at UW here in Madison, just a stone's throw away from Oregon. I teach creative writing workshops there. I've taught poetry at colleges, high schools, libraries, and a couple prisons across the country. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. If I could, am I a co-host?
And make you one real quick.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to be able to share my screen with you all now. All right. You all have access to my screen, right? Okay, perfect. All right, so this is sort of our theme for today is poetry as witness. We're going to talk about what that means. And I think it is going to sort of evolve throughout our time together today. But just for agenda's sake, here's a quick agenda. We're actually going to start with a painting today. We're going to look at a painting, and that's because we're going to talk about ekphrastic poetry. Ekphrastic poetry, we're going to define that later. We're going to analyze an ekphrastic poem. We are going to actually do some drawing. Don't worry, you don't have to share your drawing with anybody, but you will draw. And for that, you will need just a sheet of paper and a drawing utensil is fine. We're going to talk about memory a little bit and what memory means when we are working as makers, as writers, as poets. And then we're going to have some time to draft a poem. So for that, again, you'll need at the very least a sheet of paper and a writing utensil. You could also just type on your laptop or your cell phone, whatever is really accessible for you. Yeah, so this is where we are starting our little journey here. This is a painting, and I will reveal to you some information about the painting. If you recognize the painting, I ask that you don't tell us the title, okay? If you recognize the painting, because this is going to be important for us. We are going to start by analyzing this painting. And when I say analyzing, I think the brain wants to wander into like this hyper academic space, but I don't want to do that. I just want to break it apart into the things we notice, basically. What exists here in the painting? In fact, the word analysis comes from the ancient Greek to break apart. So that's all we're going to be doing is breaking apart individual elements that we notice. So let's start there. What are what stands out here? What is happening in this painting? And you can whoops, you can type in chat. You can unmute yourself and speak, whatever you're comfortable with. And if you type in chat, I'll just read it out loud.
Well, there's a farm scene.
Great, yeah. So we have a farm, and that's in the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, what do we notice about the farm? Who are our actors here?
I'm going to say it's in the Middle Ages.
Hmm.
So the clothing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a bit dated here. I can tell you this was painted in the early 1500s. Yeah. So we have a plowman, we have a shepherd, right? What else do we have? What are
So
some
there's a swimmer.
Okay, so you're pointing to over here, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have someone in the water here. And what about here? This person.
Maybe fishing.
Yeah, maybe they're fishing. Great. All right, now what about in the background?
Well, you do have the city in the, up here. You have a city in the background.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have the city, and we have some movement here. We have the ships
Mm-hmm.
heading towards the city, right? And we know they're headed towards the city. Obviously, they're facing that, but also this sort of idea of wind is very clear, pushing the boats towards the city. This is actually pretty classic for paintings during this time, to portray sort of like manual labor and the sort of like domestic idea of living in the foreground, and usually actually dark, so like darker colored, and then this idea of like the future or where things are headed, as sort of like lighter colored, and people moving towards that future element. Okay. Anything else? I think that's pretty good, but anything else?
So this little island here with the like that entrance, it looks almost like it's man-made.
Hmm.
You
Wait,
know,
here or no, here?
here, yeah, there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, it doesn't look like it's just a cave, and it looks like, I don't know,
Yeah,
making me
that's a good
think.
observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I don't think I've noticed that before. That's great. Um, so I want to tell you a little bit about this piece. Do any of you, are you familiar with this? Does anyone know the title? Excellent, excellent. So this was from Peter Bruegel. I'm not, it's a Dutch name, so I'm sure I'm horribly mispronouncing that. So like I said, early 1500s. It is so detailed. Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. So this is actually called Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. So that's what it
That's-
translates to in English. So what does that sort of how does that change things for you here?
So I'm thinking that the figure who is swimming might be drowning. Um, just because that's like the whole like spoiler alert what happens to Icarus and because it's fun to like burn and drown and die. Um, but like the positivity of human progress, but also like the scariness of of humanity too, moving too fast.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, I like that a lot. So I know you said spoiler alert, but do you think you could actually just run us through just very briefly that referent of Icarus? Who is that?
So
Even if even just the broad strokes.
Icarus was a Greek inventor during the Greek myth. Him and his son were imprisoned after making mazes. Um, and Icarus was like, hey, to escape, let's make these wings so we can fly. He became kind of obsessed with creating these wings, which kind of was the Greek mythology, like story of technology. And so he makes these wings and he flies. too close to the sun, which is where that phrase or euphemism comes from, and he gets too close to the sun and the wings burn, or I guess, yeah, him and his son gets too close to the sun, and his wings burn and his son dies, even though the scientist told him not to. So that's kind of like that story, the downfall of his son.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that helps us a lot. So yeah, so the wax that is attaching the feathers to his back melts as he flies close to the sun, because obviously, you know, a couple thousand years ago, we think the sun is about 80 feet from the earth. So it makes a little bit more sense when you think about it like that. But yeah, anyway, so we have this body now here. We have Icarus drowning. I actually think Icarus is the son, and that his father is the inventor. Daedalus or Deidus or something like that. I don't remember. But we have Icarus in the water, and now suddenly this painting opens up to us and becomes a little bit more, a little darker, right? And we start to notice other details, and I want to sort of like help us push that along. I want to talk about where everyone else seems to be looking. So what do we notice here?
Do you mean like this guy, the shepherd looking up in the sky?
Yeah, the shepherd's looking at the sky. Where's the plowman looking? And really no trick questions. It's just
I think Dave, like, just at his work,
yeah, the plowman's just looking at his work, right? Let's see. He's focused, yeah, on his work. Absolutely. A little echo there. And then the ships, they are sailing along, right? They are moving towards the city. Even who is maybe like the closest to the incident, this fisherman is just probably looking at the water itself, right? If we zoom in on these creatures, even, they're all either facing a different direction or moving a different direction from the site of the most important thing. You know, this is almost a myth. You know, for a second, somebody flew in the air, right? And everyone is sort of like moving away from it. Okay. So I think it's important to know that, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I don't know about any of you, but I am certainly not a scholar of 1500s Dutch artwork, right? But we made simple observations, I think, that really opened up our understanding of the piece, okay? And really using our analytical skills in the most simple way to just break apart small things that are happening in the work, okay? Um, so let's talk about ekphrasis. Ekphrasis is just a Greek word. An ekphrastic poem is a vivid description of a scene, or more commonly, a work of art. Through the imaginative act of narrating and reflecting on the action of a painting or sculpture, the poet may amplify and expand its meaning. So this is just a quote directly from the Poetry Foundation. I think even a more interesting addition to this is from a professor named Rebecca Olson, who teaches at Oregon State. The picture, and this is talking about ekphrastic writing, the picture it paints is itself a picture. Ekphrasis stages an encounter between representations in two mediums, one visual and one verbal. Okay, so we are thinking of how we engage two different mediums and put them in conversation with one another, right? Now, ekphrasis can happen many different ways, but usually one of the mediums is writing, okay? But the first medium could be sculpture. The first medium could be, um, it could be media of some kind. Just literally Netflix, right? Any kind of engagement with one art with another kind of art is ekphrasis, okay? And we're going to be practicing that a little bit. So I want to take those same analytical skills that we sharpened a bit and go ahead and look at an ekphrastic poem. So this poem is actually directly in response to Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. And let me go ahead and move your heads out of my field of sight. Okay. Again, I'm gonna totally mispronounce this, but it's Musée de Beaux Arts, Fine Arts Museum. Fine Arts Museum. Okay. This is from W.H. Auden. I'm going to read it for us. And while I'm reading, I just want you to be breaking things down in their individual parts, analyzing it a little bit so we can discuss what's going on here. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life, and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowmen may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. All right, so you may have encountered this poem before, but may have not known that it was an ekphrastic poem. All right. So now that we know that it is engaging with another work of art, it is engaging with Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. What do we notice about this poem?
First of all, I'm sorry, I would say I love the word. I've never heard that word before, and I'm Greek. So that's,
oh yeah.
we say phrasi, so I know that word phrase, but ekphrastic, I've never heard that word, so that's cool. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's excellent. I love that. And I'm Greek, and I've never heard of it. Yeah, that's awesome. What else stands out to us here? And you can even push on your favorite moment if you'd like to, but specifically, we want to put them in conversation with another. The work of art that we just analyzed ourselves, and now this poem.
Well, I think he's referencing another painting as well, or at least the experience of the museum in the beginning. Because, he's saying here, while eating or opening a window or just walking dully along, that just, it's like references to maybe other pieces of art that were at the museum that he saw before he goes into this one.
Yeah, yeah. So there's kind of a movement from like more broadly people looking at the old masters, so referencing these old artists, and then sort of like zooming in on one particular piece. Yeah, absolutely. What else? I'm trying to find where the first half unites with the second half of his poem. Totally. Yeah, there's a pretty clear break here. Physically, this is represented by a stanza break here. Um, stanza coming from the Italian word for room. So we have two different rooms here. And they're not really connected um, cleanly, right? We have a full stop here at tree. Um, so there is certainly a separation, right? But we do have the connection of place here, right? This is all happening in the Fine Arts Museum. Yeah. So I want to zoom in on this second stanza. What are things that you noticed here that you had previously recognized in the painting?
Sorry. Well, in the first part, the first stanza as well, what I really think there's also biblical references, the miraculous birth, as well as the very mundane, that the old masters painted all of that.
Yeah.
And there were, there wasn't one or the other, it was a totality of it all. And again, here, then the second stanza, he focuses in on from, the global to the very focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think even though we did it sort of like broadly, there is a connection between that style of painting and the sort of intersection of like learning, right? Or religion, where religion meets the future of industry and the world, et cetera, right? So certainly things that we didn't uh, open up fully are still represented in this first stanza. I wondered if anyone heard or saw Icarus fall out of the sky, or is it easier to turn away and carry on? Yeah. Yeah. I think that is like a conundrum that this poem and the painting is sort of dealing with, right? Uh, for me, a really heart-wrenching line in this poem uh, is, but for him, it was not an important failure, right? I think I think about often in my life how um, there are many falls of Icarus that are happening around me, even in my community, but more broadly the world, right? And how me personally, I feel forced to just sort of like continue on and sail forward. And that is there's some cognitive dissonance in that a little bit, in that feeling. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah, yeah, it's tough. And you know what? This poem was this is pre-70s, 1970s. Auden, I believe, died in the mid-70s. And the painting is a few centuries old, right? And I think that that does sort of speak to the kind of uh the timeliness, but also like that feeling that's sort of caught in time, that will sort of like never expire, really. Yeah. Anything else here that you wanted to poke at or just say, wow, this was really interesting?
That was interesting that Autumn chose to go for um, describing the ship as delicate instead of the leg. Um, I think it also parallels that idea of the important failure, like uh, kind of contrasting it with um, the how the ship is kind of this delicate ship, whereas like the human body that we're seeing drowning is being ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of jarring, right? This sort of like organic person is drowning organically, and horribly. But the ship is expensive and delicate, and it must move forward, right? Yeah, certainly is kind of jarring. All right, we are going to move on now to our first of two exercises. Um, I want you to draw an important meal that you had with someone, preferably just one other person, but whatever first comes to your mind, I think you should follow that. Uh, yeah, a meal. I'm limiting it to a meal because a meal is a place of sort of implied intimacy, right? And oftentimes it's a place of cultural importance. So this is your scene, and I find that creating boundaries can often make sort of a larger task feel a little bit less intimidating. All right. So I want you to draw a scene of an important meal that you had in your life. And again, you're not sharing these drawings with us. I mean, I am a terrible artist myself, so feel free to sketch as rough as you'd like. I am going to put a timer for 5 minutes on the screen. Just a minute left. It's totally okay if you're not done, if you're not finished with your scene. All right. Okay, so I'd like to hear from a couple of you, even just on chat. If a reminder, if you just type it out, I'll definitely read it. What that experience was like for you, or if you wanted to share what, just a little bit about the memory, um, that you sort of immediately felt drawn to. That would be great too.
So I was focusing on, or started thinking about a picture in my memory of my mom and me, and I'm just sharing a meal because cooking and feeding is very important to her. Um, and that got me drawing the house and the dining room area and all that kind of stuff. So, uh, yeah,
Was it any particular meal?
no, just any meal, and it's just the fact that she's 89, and in her mind, I'm still 12, so she has to feed me.
That's great. I love that. There is so much power I really feel in the mundane. So even if it's just no particular meal at all, uh, it sounds like the company is quite important though. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Can also speak to that experience. You can also say, Steven, I had no idea we were drawing today. What's up with that? Uh,
Erica also wrote in the chat.
yeah, okay. So the first meal that came to my mind was not one-on-one, but it was the meal I ate at my daughter's wedding. That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. So a very important milestone in your daughter's life and in your life, I imagine. So definitely a memorable one. Yeah, that's great. Cool. All right. So that's going to be important to us. And we are actually going to, in a couple slides, we're going to start to draft a poem in response to the drawing, right? But first, I want to actually talk with you about memory. All right. So memory is a very interesting thing because it's not a one-to-one representation of a past event, right? Memory is more like a likeness of something than it is an exact representation of a thing, right? Um, Before I go to that third bullet point, does anyone have something that comes to mind where their sort of memory of something may have like betrayed them a little bit? What's something that you feel like you remember very quickly, but then you maybe return to a place or you discuss it with someone else and you find out very quickly it is not like uh you had remembered?
I had a distinct, when you said that, it reminded me of when I went back to visit an old neighborhood and realizing, not, I mean, obviously things change, but even just the whole like where I placed the neighborhood in my brain versus where it actually was totally different geographically. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so sure, right? We're so sure of ourselves. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Disagreements with loved ones. I love that tee as well. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Yeah. It's sort of the difference too, thinking on a grander scale between what we consider to be the past versus what we consider to be history. The past is everything that actually happened, literally happened, and history is really our archiving or certain people's archiving of what happened, what took place, right? Um, yeah, perception changes over time and experiences, so sometimes things become clear, and other times they things get muddied in the details. Yeah, absolutely. So to go back a couple slides. Um, I want to point back to this second quote. The picture it paints is itself a picture. Ekphrastic stages an encounter between whoops, gotta move your heads again, representations in two mediums, one visual and one verbal. So it paints a picture that is itself a picture, a representation. Okay. So we have Auden's poem is itself a representation of a representation. All right. It is not a one-on-one, but we have one speaker's experience with this thing, with the art, right? But when we start to think of memory, memory is a representation of a past event, right? It's not an exact it's not exactly accurate, right? And there exists some gray area here. And I think that that gray area can really give us some permission. And I want to, as artists, permission as artists here. And I think that's going to make a little bit more sense when I go to the next slide. So here is a poem I wrote in response to that first prompt. A long time ago, this poem I think was published a couple years ago. So if you are not super familiar with my work at all, um, I I like to write about my brother a lot. My brother went missing in 2009. So I will often draw from that as sort of like a well of interrogating the world, interrogating how I'm feeling, et cetera, right? So I was thinking about the last time that we had a meal together. So I'm going to read this poem for you all. There's a donut shop in Ojai, California. There's a donut shop in Ojai, California that lets you smoke cigarettes. My brother exhaled through the fingers of a bear claw. Our last breakfast together is still caught in my molars. I ash its memory like parliaments. He told me the joke about Noah, how he always kept the skunks in a lifeboat dragging behind the ark. In that booth, we were sacred, holding our worst selves behind us. Brian held a glazed ring above his head. It glistened, that half-eaten halo. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about that permission again. All right. So what happened was I, as a much older person, tried to remember the last meal that I ever had with my brother, and I could not, which is a very human thing. It's a very real thing. And grief works in very mysterious ways, right? So this poem is entirely made up. But the individual parts of this poem are completely true, and the emotional core, the emotional truth of this poem is entirely true. All right. When I was in grad school in Indiana, there was a donut shop that lets you smoke cigarettes. I remember that. It was not in Ojai, California. I'm from California. I have never been to Ojai, California. I don't remember anyone exhaling smoke through a bear claw, but I thought that was a really interesting image. So I added it to the piece. Our last breakfast together is still caught in my molars. You know, I don't know what our last breakfast together was, but the thought of my brother, the thought of not remembering what our last meal together was, is caught in my molars, is caught in my memory, right? Um, you know, there are religious elements here, you know, part of our growing up together, but really we become sacred here. And did Brian actually hold a glazed ring above his head? No. But would he? I think so, right? So this ekphrastic poem is inspired by memory, memory as not a representation of an actual event, because it doesn't need to be, because I don't put that kind of pressure on memory, right? And it's important to know as artists too that we don't owe honesty to our readers, right? But we write the things that lead to a very honest emotional center of a piece, right? Do we know for a fact that Auden went to that museum? No. Do we know that he walked through crowds that weren't paying attention to the art? No, right? But we get the feeling that that poem is very special and important to that speaker, that that moment, whether it happened or not, is important. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to start drafting a poem in response to the drawing that you did. And it's going to be 15 lines long maximum. So I don't want you to follow any sort of formal, this is all going to be free verse poetry, right? But I also don't want you to feel beholden to the truth, or to feel beholden to anyone in particular. All right. I want you to write towards the emotional core that feels most honest to you, and not to anyone else. Cool. All right. I am going to put up another timer for 10 minutes. Where are we at? Yeah, let's just do 10 minutes. And I will see you all then. Just under half your time. Just under 2 minutes left. Remember that you should just keep on going at your own pace. No compulsion to finish. All right. If you could just let me know you're back, even if it's just typing something quickly in chat. Hi, hello. Great, both back. Awesome. Okay, so I know this slide is very scary, and literally no compulsion to share anything at all. But even if you had just like one moment, one line, one description, so far that you're excited about, that would be great. You could even just type it in chat, and I will read it for folks. Perfect. Yeah, go ahead. I'd also like to hear what that experience was like for any of you too, if you'd rather share that about the process rather than the words themselves. That's great too. Monica, did you have something?
I can share mine, as Erica's, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, love that.
The wheat tins were a secret. They would crawl out of their skin plastic sleeves, whispering as you held them cupped in your palm, an offering that you would slip into my eager fingers as you gently grasped my other wrist and joked about the roughness of my palm and how I didn't do enough work around the house for it to be so callous. We ate our snack huddled in the living room, a pre-dinner rebellion, a bravery of sorts. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I had one since, but I remember them, flaked heavily with sea salt, but vaguely sweet, sun-kissed from the light streaming in the kitchen window, slightly stale.
Hey, that's great. You did all that in just 10 minutes? That's incredible. Yeah, who would have thought that wheat thins could be so emotional? And here we are. Yeah. Seriously, the mundane, I'm telling you, that's everyone has power in the mundane. That's really great. I love also ending on slightly stale. Yeah, that's perfect. All right, just waiting on some typing. Also, my cats are going feral in the background, so I apologize if you hear any of that. All right, the wedding dinner. I found my place setting and took a seat, my mind taking in all that surrounds me, trying to focus on those specific moments. Not simply so I don't forget this special day, but also that the memories of you sprout to bloom, don't overflow what is to be enjoyed now and in the future. Excellent. Great. Thank you, Erica. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I know it's an intimidating thing, but I appreciate and also know that these are drafts, and I really hope that you follow them into the future. I wanted to end with just some final tips and maybe some reiterations, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you had if you have any. So, some final tips. Becoming a better writer involves becoming a better witness to the world. All right. Um, does reading help a lot? Yes, a ton. Does drafting aimlessly help a lot? Yes, a ton. But also, I think just being a better witness, being able to open yourself and accept the things that you find yourselves naturally gravitating to in the world, right? So I always give this example from me, from my own past. There was a semester in school where I had a lot of death in the family. And there was this banana that my neighbor left out in the parking lot. And because it was the summer, it turned into black over the weekend. But I didn't see it until it turned black. I just saw it as just somebody's banana peel that they left on the ground. And then when I revisited it startled me because I was positive that it was a dead bat on the ground, right? And I think the things we notice about the world really tell us a lot about what we're experiencing in our own private lives. And just like that sort of translation happens, our reader understands our speaker's private life a little bit more based off of what the things they experience and they engage with in the poem, right? The world is physical, so present tense, right? We're experiencing things constantly new, but the world is also emotional in the past tense. So you can be a better witness of your own world through your memories, right? And again, those memories are just are not are one-to-one, right? Just a likeness. And finally, I think it's important to find an archival method that fits your lifestyle. So the things that you witness, trust me that they're very fleeting. Those images are very fleeting if you don't write them down somewhere, right? So if you find yourself magnetized to something, start archiving that thing. Whether it is just analog, writing it on a sheet of paper that you carry in your back pocket, or or a file that you keep on your phone, whatever works for you. Those things will really find themselves anew in your poetry, right? So yeah. All right, I know that we're just at about 7:32, but if you all had any questions, I'd definitely be happy to answer them. But if you have to leave, totally understand that too.
Well, thank you. This was really enjoyable. But
Thank you.
yeah, I do have to go, but thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for coming by.
What do you recommend people read if they want to keep reading, and what kind of books or poetry are you reading currently?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also a huge question for me as someone whose to be read bookshelf grows and grows every day. Uh, I think a really good place to start if you don't really have a feeling yet for contemporary poetry, though, is to actually either subscribe or for free find a literary journal that you become invested in. What's great about a literary journal, as opposed to just buying somebody's book of poetry, is that you might not really like that person's book of poetry, right? But a literary journal has a selection from many people in one place. So you can kind of develop a taste or see what poems that you like versus what you might not be that into, right? And a lot of this is free. So yeah, of course you've heard of things like the New Yorker, right? But someplace, for example, like Guernica, or I really love Split Lip magazine. Um, these are some great online journals. Um, the poem I read from earlier is published in a journal called The Boiler, these are all free literary magazines that you can visit anytime online. Yeah. And Erica, I think you had some. That was great. Thank you. I don't have any questions, but a lot to think about. Awesome. That's great, Erica. Thank you so much for stopping by. All right, everyone. All right, Monica, should I just take off or do you want to stop the recording?